Well, welcome to Walking in Spirit and Truth. We are glad that you're here tonight.
So a little over a week ago, we went to Lake Palladuro with Life of Worship and had a tremendous time out there at the lake. We did not go in the water because the water was about 61 degrees. And so it was a little bit chilly to do any mikvahs, but we still had a tremendous time with meeting with everybody and enjoying that together with everybody and gathering and singing and worshiping and preaching some word and having some classes and having lots of fun games and stuff. I mean, that's what we had at Life of Worship. And by the way, if you think that sounds like fun, we're going to have a lot more of that when it comes to Sukkot. And Sukkot is on its way. And we want to invite everybody and anybody to go to our website, lifeofworshipamarillo.org, to join us and go in there and sign up and register to join us at Lake Palladuro in the Texas Panhandle for Sukkot this year. And we would love for you to come out there and join us. We have tents, spaces, we have RV spaces, the bathrooms are really clean and they take care of those, and we'll have just great time and fellowship and fun and just an enjoyable time out in nature. And I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to say hi to Joe that's on there. Joe's been out there. It's a beautiful place out there. Don't worry about the day and the hour. We're commanded to gather on these feast days, and what a tremendous time this would be if you would gather with us. So we would love for you to come out too.
We're on Psalm 91, verse 5, and we're going to get going because we got a lot to say. As you know, we've been walking through this together, and we're going to continue down this path because it has so much significance in this day and this hour that we live in. And thank you, Joe. I want to hear all about your dream here soon. Anyway, Joe said she had a dream, and dreams are important, especially when you can remember them. There's a reason. So Psalm 91, verse 5, Mr. Craig.
He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to Yahweh, my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. For it is he who delivers you from the snare of the trapper and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with his pinions, and under his wings you may seek refuge. His faithfulness is a shield and bulwark. You will not be afraid of the terror by night or by the arrow that flies by day.
All right, so there we are. You shall not be afraid of the terror by night, nor the arrow that flieth by day. So we're going to look at some words again and break it down and then put it all back together. And of course, that first word there, they shall not be afraid for the terror by night. So terror, we have discussed this on several shows, but we're going to refresh your memory. So soon and very soon, when anybody uses the word for terror here or dread, which is pachad, P-A-C-H-A-D, you're going to know automatically what it means. You're going to understand that Hebrew term so much. You're going to understand the intricacies of it. So you get it down deep. So here it is. What is it? It's this idea of dread. It's an object of dread. It is something that is ever with you. It almost seems like that fear, that dread is constant. It's constant and it's in your face. And even that pay, which is a reference to being silent almost in fear. And the het has this idea of becoming incapacitated. Then you have the dalet, which is a doorway. So it can be positive or negative. Do we have the fear of Yah? Do we rest in Yahweh, or are we listening to the enemy? There you go. But this pachad, we fear for our safety. We fear for our life. We fear this constant dread where we can't eat, we can't sleep, we can't function as normal because there's this fear upon us. And you may say, well, is that happening? Well, look around you right now. That kind of thing has been happening for over a year now, not just in the United States, but all over the world. There's this pachad, this fear, this constant dread of what's coming and creeping along, what's out there. And so we've been dealing with that. We're not going to get into great detail of that, but there's something looming over you, and this fear is staying with you, and life is no longer what it once was because of this pachad, because of this fear that is always, to me, that's always with you. it's something that you just you can't get away from it. You can't get away from it. So after we look at that term, let's look at the word night. Now, we've had two words for night.
I have something to say about that.
Okay.
Okay, think about this. Is is there's so many different elements that we've gone through in this past year that has really invoked a spirit of fear on people, to where there's many people that are out there that dread going out into public. They've dreaded going into public spaces because of what the media has been hyping about this so-called. And so because of that, people have been very, very afraid. They've been locked down. And I want to give you a story. In this last week, I had to do a well check on a lady. And she's elderly, and what a well check is just simply this: is that the company that hired us to go out there is that they are paying workers' comp benefits to this lady who lost her husband back in the 90s, who died on the job, and so they've been paying his benefits to her. And one of the requirements is to go out there, make sure she's still alive, that it's not a relative that's still collecting the money, that she's not married, that it's just going to her, because all the benefits go away if she gets married, or if she passes away, and that type of thing. And so I have to go out there, get a picture of her, and get an affidavit signed. And it just really caught me off guard, but it's really about this dread thing. Because when I went to the door, one, I couldn't go unless I called ahead. Of course, I'd always call ahead anyway. But in addition to that, is that she needed to know when I was going to be there, and so that she could expect me, because she was afraid to open the door to anybody. And I needed to be there right about the time that Meals on Wheels arrived, so that she would be ready to open the door. And when she opened the door, she was all covered up completely. Now, partly as being elderly, I think she was really, really cold. And she had a hat on, a coat, and a hood of the coat up over her head. And I think a stocking cap over her head. And she had gloves on. But she was covered up with a mask. And she was so afraid that me or anybody else that might be coming to the door would be bringing something that would bring, I guess, would bring her demise. And that dread that you were talking about, Sandi, is I can't imagine living with that dread day in and day out in the type of condition that she was in. It just made my heart break when I saw her.
I look around and I see that all over. I see young people and old people, particularly, more so those two spectrums, on the end and on the beginning of their life. I see more fear in those age groups than I do in the others, with doing all of the requirements to the letter that the society says you need to do right now. Even if you're outdoors, or there's no one else around you, or there's nobody else that even lives with you, you still continue with those procedures that have been given by society right now. And right. So I see that fear. I see fear all around me. So-called believers and non-believers. That's really the word that has gripped society. It's fear. It's fear of the unknown. It's dread of what may come. It's dread that they can't even no longer function correctly. And that's what the definition of God is. And the next word I want to look at, which we're going to talk about how they play together in a moment, is Lael, which is night. Now, it is completely different than Hosek. Hosek is another word that can be translated as night, but here it's Lael. And in the Hebrew culture, when you're looking at the word Hosek, it carries the sense of blindness and misery and falsehood and ignorance. But that's not what we're looking at here, because Lael has a lot more to it, which we're not going to do on this show, but it is the opposite of day. Some say it's neutral. I think that it's not completely neutral. But you first see it mentioned in Genesis 1:5, where it says, Yahweh called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and there was evening and there was morning one day. And that's the word Lael, the same word that's used here. Now, we've got to remember that they're contrasting day and night here. And we're going to discuss the day in a moment, but they're doing it for a reason. Okay, now, when you look at the word night, number H3915, Lael, It's a concrete noun, but it also means winding stair. But it's from this unused root meaning to fold back. And of course, it's spelled lamed vav hey. The lamed, is the shepherd's staff. So to teach or yoke or to bind. And the vav is a tent peg. So secure, connect, hook. And then the shepherd's staff, of course, again, is that teach and that yoke and to bind. So it's really like the staff attached to the staff, or a scroll is a night scroll and rolls the scroll at the end of the day. What are we attached to? I mean, there's something there that we need to look at. But that word night also has sort of this impending gloom that sometimes follows after it when we think of just the word night. It's a metaphor. It can be a metaphor for actually weeping and suffering. And the word is also uses this idea of time, this pious desires, prayer and praise and meditation. And also this idea of warding the forces of evil off. So we can think about this when we think about Gideon. What did Gideon do? He capitalized on what? The fear of night. Now, because of superstition and because of experience and because of darkness itself, more like the Hosek darkness, people have this general idea that it's night, there's fear. And even in children, turn on the light, there's monsters, or you hear, now I haven't ever heard that from my little Amarillo, but I mean, you see that in media, but you see that in people. Oh, it's dark. I can't see. So I don't want to get out there. What's out there in the night? The opposite of day. What's out there? That's almost like they think these forces come out at night and they're looming and they're ready to get them. And that's not just today. That's always been. There's been a superstition associated with night. And so what did Gideon do? Because of the orders of Yahweh, really Yahweh's orders, he capitalized on all of this and he attacked the Midianite army. When? At night. Because as a rule, even ancient armies in ancient times did not fight at night. Why? Because they couldn't actually see who they were fighting. They didn't have flashlights. They didn't have, I guess they had torches and things like that, but they didn't fight at night. So you could easily torch the area to solve a problem, but they refused to fight because they feared what? They feared the presence of evil spirits, because there's that superstition. There is something that's lurking in the night, and that was their fear, this presence. So even in the Middle East, many soldiers are so superstitious that they still to this very day, they will not fight at night. Okay. And we may say, oh, that's crazy. What's going on? Well, let's honestly, if you look at it in society, people do have this fear that somebody's at the door. It doesn't bother you if it's in the middle of the day, but if it's closer to night, oh, who's there? And it's almost this fear that can grip you. And when you buy into it, sometimes you can't, it just builds because you open the door for that spirit to take over. But in the days of Gideon, Israel was able to capitalize because of Yahweh, through Yahweh, which tells us then that what do we need to do if we're Yahweh's? We don't need to fear the terrors at night. And no matter what covert operations the enemy is going to try to create, we are still resting in Yahweh. He is our protector. He's our leader. He is the answer. He is the one who will stand before us and stand around us and protect us and guide us. Now, the Talmud is written, which we know what that is, but it also really gives way to this talking of this fear of night almost to some aspect. But I want us to go with the story because really more what the Talmud is talking about is the fear of evil spirits. And this is what we're talking about because society thought evil spirits came out at night. Well, we're just going to leave it at that because if they're there, they're there. But when we look at a specific thing that Yeshua did, and some of the reasoning behind why it was done, we're going to understand the superstition that even existed in Israel that was even brought into Yeshua's time. Now, one of the things that the Pharisees got on Yeshua about was for Yeshua violating what? The traditions of man, their traditions which they lifted above even Yahweh's word. And one of those things happened to be that instructing his disciples to wash their hands before eating bread. It didn't have anything to do with good hygiene, actually, because their tradition says that this in Deuteronomy 18:10-12, declaring that consulting familiar spirits, necromancy, enchanting, and witchcraft were an abomination to God. So we know all of that is don't mess with it, don't do with it, stay away from witchcraft, stay away from all of that because it's an abomination. But what the people in the Talmud, they would twist those words and make a loophole where they could actually do those very things. They actually even used the scriptural references and passages and reversed it, presenting the idea that it's okay to call on demons. It's okay to call on spirits to come to your aid with sorcery. And that they said, hey, this isn't idolatry because demons were not being worshiped. They were just being talked to. So we're not violating the Torah. That's what the Talmud implies. Well, that's not true because, again, we're looking at this fear of these evil spirits. So that's bad. And that's why the Talmud can be used for historical reference, but it's not the word. And you've got to weigh it in with discernment because there are some things that we could take hold, have wisdom, but there's a lot in there that's just a mess. But Yeshua agreed, not good, and in fact, a violation of the law of Moses to be involved in witchcraft and all of those things that I previously mentioned. And he was basically blasting the Pharisees, telling them, hey, man, what you guys are doing it's wrong. And so when the Talmud teaches that at night the demons will overcome a person when they're sleeping, and when he awakes, the demonic spirit moves into the hands, into the tips of the fingers. Yeah, this is in there, guys. So here we have that connection with the superstition, with the washing of hands, and with nighttime, because it's even brought in to the way the believers, or not believers, those that were Jewish at the time that followed the Talmud, would live their lives out because they believed superstitiously. So they were taught that demons even live in water and they love the water. And so remember the pigs that Yeshua sent the demons into? Well, the sages taught that you need to pour water over the hands 3 times to wash away the demons. Okay, guys, this is crazy. Yeah, I know. But they also said you need to do it especially before you eat because you want to wash off any remnant of demonic activity before you pass the demon into your bread and then you ingest the demon. Okay, is this crazy or what? It's crazy, right? And so they didn't have any idea of microbes. They didn't have any idea of germs. They didn't understand that. They knew people got sick, so it must be a demon. Now, that place where we can't blame everything on a demon, but also their idea of how it all happened is just crazy. But people still fall for that kind of stuff, right? Right. So the Pharisees explained that every time someone was sick, that a demon was involved. They didn't understand viruses. They didn't understand bacteria. They didn't understand infection, but it all had to do with demonic activity. And so the tradition of the fathers observed that a person who washed their hands before eating didn't come down and didn't get sick as often. So what do? They relate that those two things go together. And so they sprinkle that water over their hands 3 times. And that's how that tradition was born. But in Matthew 15, Yeshua is blasting the Pharisees. He says, stop twisting the commandments of God and around to the point that you're breaking the commandment itself. And then you're coming and accusing who? They accuse Yeshua of not following the commands. But in reality, it was them that were violating the Torah. And that's one thing I've been told all my life, and I've been trained that way too. When you have the accusing finger pointing at you, usually the accuser is the one that's doing that very thing. And that is happening here. So why I brought this story up is because I wanted you to understand that the night and demonic activity were very much a part of life. And actually, I would say probably it's still a true statement. So the terror by night, both of those things, something that you're almost paralyzed, that you can't function anymore. And it's happening at night, which even becomes greater. You fear the unknown. You fear what you cannot see. You fear what you may not understand. So there you go. That fear, but we need to know that Yah always says, fear not. Fear not, for I've redeemed you. Fear not, for I've called you by name. He says that over and over and over again. Fear not. Yes.
Well, hey, I just wanted to mention something in terms, and I didn't know if you're going to go there or not, but one of the meanings of that word, Lul, is also speaks about the night seasons. The night seasons. And so it talks about the night time where dread is, but there's also seasons that seem like it's night, that we live through a period of time that it seems like, oh man, when is the light going to come and break through, because I've been going through this dreaded darkness. And so there's a couple verses that go along with that. I'd have to go back and pull it up. But when we think about the night seasons, and going back to what we were talking about earlier, talk about how in this last year, for many people, it's been like a night season, especially in the places where people have not had the freedom. And you might even look at Canada right now. Canada is in a night season right now. They've had complete loss of freedom of movement, and they even have lost their right to vote. And so because they've canceled the elections up there. And this is a time where people are like, do we even have a say in what's being done because of the edicts that have been placed upon us? So think about how people being constrained to their homes, not knowing what's lurking out there, can really cause a spirit of dread to rest upon them. And we as believers need to be a light to them. We need to bring that message of hope that many of these people just don't have. Now, if you're living in a state like Florida or Texas, things have opened up. Oklahoma, there's a lot of freedom, a lot of movement, a lot of things going around. We need to recognize that we've got friends and relatives that are out there that are dealing with this. And, praise y'all, we still have telecommunications one way or another. We can talk to them on the phone.
Right. Well, I want us to understand and stay here for just a moment that basically night is associated with evil, and yet we still do that in society, I would say. But we've got to understand his word. 1 John 4:4, because he who is in you is what? Greater than he who's in the world. Romans 8:37. In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. 2 Timothy 1:7. Elohim has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. And we need to remember those things. If we are in Yahweh, we rest in him. So we're not afraid of the terror by night, nor the arrow that flies by day. We walk in assurance that he is with us, and he will never leave us nor forsake us. That he is light, and we are connected to him. And what is actually supposed to happen is that when we go into the places that are opposite of light, darkness, that it all of a sudden is lit, because what are we? We are that living, walking Torah scroll. I like what Camille said here. And by the way, hi, Camille and Bob and Joe. She said that Samson is sunshine and Delilah is night. And I would love her to come and talk about that. Actually, that would be really good. But I want us to not end here with this, though, because I want us to jump over to the next part of that verse. All right. So what is that as a reminder to you? Let me see if I can find it. There we go.
While you're looking that up, let me give you this verse. Psalm 16:7. I will bless Yahweh, who has given me counsel. My reins also instructs me in the night season. So just if you think you're in a time of night, just remember that his counsel is there to instruct us during those times.
Right. Well, I want us to continue with that verse, because it talks about nor the arrow that flies by day. So we have a contrast of night and day right there in the same verse. Now, if you think about this, How many of us are afraid of arrows in this day and age? Probably not many. And even then, people didn't necessarily fear arrows unless you were in the middle of a war, or unless people came and attacked your village, or there was a foreign invader of some sort. So you normally, fearing arrows in the day didn't normally just happen. So when you think of things that way, we understand that it's more of a metaphoric statement. Okay. Now, if we look at the word arrow, it's hetz, and it's from the root hatzatz. And from that root, it actually means, with the het and the sade, it means to divide. Okay. It's a military word, and ancient soldiers and warriors weren't paid much. You pretty much didn't get anything unless you were a professional soldier, and that didn't happen till later on in society. So mostly what you got were a whole bunch of men, farmers, shepherds that would come together and with homemade weapons and protective clothing that maybe they put together, and they would defend their land, or they would invade a land. And so with talking about this being a military term, how were the soldiers paid? Well, they didn't receive a paycheck. They didn't receive gold or silver. Mostly what they received was booty. So when they went and conquered a land or a nation, they were allowed to plunder the conquered land and of all of its food and whatever else they saw of value. And so to keep the soldiers from fighting amongst each other, the booty would actually be divided up amongst the soldiers. So military leaders would organize that plunder in a way that everybody got an equal share. And that is actually where the word hatzatz originated. So there was this arrow, as an arrow was one of the primary weapons in warfare, because an arrow was always associated with plunder. Now I find that very interesting. An arrow is associated with plunder, because when you plunder a land, what are you doing to that land? The forces that want to come into parts of the world that are rich in resources, what do they want to do? They don't want to hurt the land, because they want to use that land for their own plunder, for their own bounty. And that's what would happen, is that the soldiers were paid in that plunder. And when you plunder a land, you are literally wounding that land, or you are piercing that land, like an arrow will pierce flesh, like an arrow will pierce a body, and it will bring a wound. So you have this idea of hatzatz, or hetz from arrow, from the root hatzatz, is you have this basic idea of it meaning to pierce or to wound. Okay. Now I'm bringing it together, guys. So the oof is flying. And so you have the flying arrow, and that means to fly about to and fro. Oof. And the word is actually an ancient Canaanite word for augur. And augur is an old English word from the movement of troops. Okay. We're back to a military term again. So it actually goes back even further than that, because it was once used, oof, OOPH, was used as to express the flying movement of birds. So when they fly, they're singing, they're feeding the birds, along with the birds, regular birds, the birds of sacrifice, all. And I'm not necessarily talking about the sacrifices on Yah's altar. What I'm talking about is they were sacrifices, but birds were also used for divination and predicting the future by their song and other mannerisms of birds, which it ties back in together with a sound. The sound they make would somehow show the future. I'm not saying this is true. I'm saying this is the background. So all of a sudden you have something about hetz and flying, something that's associated with sound or talking. So the movement of troops were detected by what? If you knew an army was approaching, if you couldn't see it, you could hear it. And you could hear the sound that they make. The same way birds in flight are singing and they're making sounds. And then those who would delve into witchcraft and other things and interpret it, the soothsayers, they would use whatever was being done. So it was, if you're associating night, you're associating this spiritual thing, the terror by night or the arrow that flies by day. We have these spiritual meanings here. So it was talking to those who were listening for those sounds. So what is this? What am I bringing about here? Is that another word for the giving of the message is talking. There were talking. Talking are those arrows, the words, the speech, the flying things that come and pierce the body, that wound the body, that piercing hasats. And we need to remember that, because words pierce far more than actions in our society, in our believing community. Oh my, what people say literally brings people together or tears a congregation apart. And it does damage that's often irreparable. The words, the piercing, wounding words, the arrow that flies by day. So we have here this picture that's being presented for the fear of the arrow that flies by day, this talk, this oof, which is wounding and piercing at thoughts. And so what do we fear? What that is spiritual by day? Usually, especially in our congregations, it's the things people say about us, or oftentimes even to us, because the words people say directly to us wound us and pierce us. So it could be the talk of, hold on just one second, let me get this out, and then we'll go there. I want us to again think about society today. Fear has been brought on by the words of media, by the words of well-meaning preachers and teachers. If you don't do it in the right spirit, even what we say here in this network could possibly bring about something fearful within you. You know, will we have food? Will we have water? What about the meteors? What about the hail? What about the plagues? What about the lack of resources? Will we be able to stay in our homes? What's happening? All of those things are arrows that flies by day, not to mention the person talk to talk arrows. But those things, all of this talk is piercing, creating this piercing effect, this fear among believers. Yes.
Well, I thought you were making a really good point there as well. When you were talking about, people are afraid what people might say in our congregations. So why would they be afraid? Excuse me. And well, when you think about the arrow, it relates to the root is talking about, I think it's hets. It's talking about to divide or a tent wall. I mean, it gives a picture of the tent wall where you've got that a wall of sides, or a tent wall that divides or separates from the inside from the outside. And I think what happens a lot of times is that people are afraid, for whatever reason, to be separated from the congregation by words. And it can be used that way, and used for people or used against people. But the fact is that people want to be included; they don't want to be excluded. And we always have that possibility that when we gather, or when we talk, or when we meet, even right here on Lamb Network, is that we might say something that would cause someone to be offended, or to cause someone to feel separated from. And then what does the enemy do? If we're not gathered and we're scattered, the enemy can divide and conquer. And we've got to be really careful about that. And that's what that brings fear. It brings dread. It brings that concern.
And Camille said it makes you think of the evil report of the 10 spies, this week's Torah portion. I mean, contagious. Absolutely. Yeah. Because, and what it did, the words of the spies actually did what? It destroyed a nation. As Camille said, fear is contagious, and that's what we need to remember. Why we do not fear man, because we know if we're resting in him that he's going to have us no matter what our circumstances, because that is exactly what the spies did. The 10 spies, what did they do? They told of what they saw, not what they knew. We know that Yahweh is with us, so who can be against us? We know that he protects us. We know that he's got us. We know who he is. He is Yahweh. There's none greater than him. But yet we're gonna let fear, the evil report, control our actions. Well, we can't let it scare us because he feeds us. He keeps us safe under the shadow of his wings. We've already talked about that. So the gossips and the rumors and the jealousies and the power struggles and the things that are happening all around us in society that look scary, we don't fear. Fear not, fear not. That's what the word says. So if we're a people that are motivated by fear, then we're motivated by the enemy instead of Yahweh himself and his word. Because as Camille said, fear is contagious because we spread it and it grows. We cannot rest in the words of man, because the word sticks and stones may break my bones, but what you tell me is not going to hurt me. That's not true. It can. It very much can. But our real defense against the enemy, the flying arrows, the hatzatz, the hurtful talk, is knowing the only one we need to please is Yeshua. We will follow his words. We listen to him. We do not fear anything else. We can't. We shouldn't, because the enemy is going to try his shots against us. He's going to try to use what's in here and what's said to move us in fear, to move us out of the protection of Yahweh, to move us out of trusting him. And we can't let that happen. We can't let terror come from spoken words. We can't let those arrows pierce us, or the fear of them, because he's not going to let that. He's not going to let that happen. And in fact, I really want us to remember, how often does Yahweh command us not to fear? Because here it says, what does it say? What did you read, verse 5 again?
You will not be afraid of the terror by night, or of the arrow that flies by day.
Okay. And over again, did he ask us? He say, I hope you're not afraid. You shall not be afraid. And when we read his words, he's commanding us, fear not, Abram. I am your shield and your reward. Your reward will be very great. Genesis 15:1. Fear not, for I am with you and will bless you and multiply you and your offspring. Genesis 26:24. And the servant said to Elisha, alas, my master, what shall we do? He said, do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Then Elisha prayed and said, oh Yahweh, please open his eyes that he may see. So Yahweh opened his eyes and of the young man, and he saw and beheld the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire around Elisha. And that's 2 Kings 6:15-17. And that's not just there. We see over and over in the word, in the Torah, in the word, he tells us not to fear. Yahweh is saying, fear not. So what kind of sentence is that? It's a sentence in and of itself. It is a command, just as Camille said, it is a command. We are not to walk in fear. So here we have these verses here that we trust in him in the night and in the day, that he is our shield. We cannot fear what's happening around us, but we trust in him in all things. And I like what Bob brings up. He brings he talks about the frequency of sound, and that we could do a whole nother part to this time on that phrase in itself.
Yeah, I was also going to say, fear not is an imperative. So
that's right.
It is, fear not is a commandment, and there's resonance and there's frequency of sound with that. It is, but it's an imperative to be that, which is really a command to be bold, to be strong, to be very courageous, because the Lord our God is with us.
And that just reminds me, we don't have time on this program tonight, but along with what Bob has been saying, is that you and I were talking about there's a sound that brings about fear. And I don't want us to go there yet, but there is literally a sound that the enemy knows that sound, and actually people know that sound, but it brings about a fear response within us. And maybe we could talk a little bit about that next time, but it's very interesting. Do you remember talking with me about that last week or so?
Yes. The frequency of fear.
A frequency of fear. Maybe we need to talk about that. I want you guys to prayerfully consider making a donation to Life of Worship in this season right now. We need your prayers, but we need your financial assistance as well, your financial blessing, that is. And if you can do that, you could go to our website and make that donation, and it would be greatly appreciated, because we need partners with us that are willing to do that as well, arm in arm and hand in hand, because it takes money to run the ministry. And anyway, I know I don't want to belabor that, but the word says you have not because you ask not. And so we're asking for your help, right? Thank you for joining us this evening.